I guess, yeah, part of the reason I had you on is I sent out this tweet saying, could you use your help for a Trades in 5 show, whether it be on YouTube, pod, etc.? What experts in the community would you call being a quote unquote content creator? So I was undercaffeinated apparently, and I said an individual or team that makes and distributes content in a unique and effective way. Well, a couple people mentioned at McNamara Dynasty, and I had heard of you before and followed you on Twitter. Great follow on Twitter, funny follow on Twitter. So yeah, talk to me, man. Why do you think you were mentioned? You were tagged twice, and then somebody in the DMs actually hit me up and said, "Oh, Jordan's on tonight. That's gonna be sick. He's awesome." So talk to me, man. Why were you mentioned?
I wouldn't consider myself an expert, so that's the one thing. I sort of pride myself on what I don't know, right? In terms of recognizing what we don't know and using that to our advantage, right? So, when people ask me specific players, when people ask me a lot of things, I think a lot of times my answers to those questions are based in a ton of uncertainty, right? And that's the way I play the game, right? And it's funny because just today, the fantasy receipts king guy or whatever, the account tried to flame me on a trade that I said from it was from like 18 months ago. And it said something to the effect of Isaiah Pacheco for Tyrion Davis Price in a 2023 second. And I said, you make, it's something like you can bleed your leagues dry doing this. Right.
Yeah. Or it's like death by 1,000 cuts or something like that.
Yeah. It's killing him by 1,000 cuts. And
I'm going to try to share it here.
That's a huge win, right? That's not to mean that trade is a huge win. Right? And when people send me trades, like sometimes they're huge wins. That trade was the right process, right? Yes. That trade was the right process. And the way I think about that is, if given the opportunity to do this 1,000 times, which side would you take? Would you take the guy that was drafted in the 7th round with a 251st pick? And by the way, both of them rookies. Okay. Would you take the guy that is the 251st pick in the draft with a hit rate of something less than 10% historically? Or would you take the guy in the 3rd round with a hit rate around 40% historically, plus a second, which has a hit rate of, we'll call it about 35% historically. Okay. The answer to that question, the answer to that question has to be the package side. It has to be. Okay.
100%.
Especially when they come in as rookies. Now, is that trade going to miss? Did I lose that? Did the package side of that trade lose? Probably, right? Some people have come back, and actually, this is the most support I've gotten on social media in months. People are like, that pick could have been.
They were like, it wasn't bad. There was like good players going around that. And everybody was like, you're digging deep, fantasy receipts.
Yeah. This is the most support I've gotten from Twitter in months. So that was encouraging. But I think the thing about that is like, I don't have to really know the difference between, right? I'm just kind of using base rates, right? Like, and I think it's funny, like we can talk about a guy like Puka Nacua. This is similar type situation. But you look at a guy and you just kind of apply the base rates to these things, and you have to be super convinced and really, really, really sure of yourself to go against that historically. And that's kind of the way that I look at it, right? So I'm just kind of playing the odds on these things. Again, I understand players, I follow players, I do a lot of analysis on players, but ultimately at the end of the day, I come back to, I have to be super convinced to move off the base rate, especially of incoming rookies. And when you get a chance to do a trade like that, right? If I get the chance to do that trade 1,000 times, I'm going to crush that trade. Going to crush it. If you give me 7th round rookie versus a 3rd round rookie and a future second, I'm going to crush that trade. Crush it. Right. That's the type of trade that if you make it a couple times a year, you're going to be way ahead at the end of the day. Right. If that person's not named Tyrion Davis Price, if the person's named Brian Robinson or Rashad White,
exactly.
Right. Or if it's not Isaiah Pacheco, it's somebody else, right? If it's I don't even remember who the other 7th round picks of that were, but you kind of get the idea, right? Like if you just sort of apply those kind of principles, and you just use the profiles of the players instead of the specific players. I think that's super important, right? And so that's the thing that really governs me as a dynasty player, and ultimately as a dynasty analyst. And I kind of find it funny when people call me an expert, because my expertise is just saying, appreciating the uncertainty of the game, right? And
Yeah,
all of it's governed in
embracing
that.
the variance and stuff. Yep.
Yeah, right. And embracing what we don't know and harnessing ways to kind of reduce that risk. Right. And I think
Yeah.
so it's funny to me that people consider me an expert because I don't purport to be an expert in like player analysis, right? Unless it's quarterbacks, right? But by the way,
Yeah.
like a guy, if you just look at the rest of that draft, there was actually I don't think any other 7th round running backs were drafted in that class. But you just look at some of the other guys that even like right above him, like Tyler Beatty and Tristan Ebner, like
Okay. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
odds of
I'm
hitting
sure
from where
they're
we
still
go
on
hit.
some of my teams. I'm sure they're living on some MFL teams because I can't even log onto that freaking platform.
Right. Kevin Harris, right? Like that, those are the
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
that are sort of in that range, and then actually, 100 picks earlier is Kyron Williams. So it's funny, like you kind of look at some of those, but overall, like if you'd made that trade, if you just kept making that trade, like I think you'd be much more ahead, over the long term. So that's kind of my approach. So I might have got far afield of your question.
You're good, man. You're good. It's yeah, when it's my show, my stream, it's very loose. Let's just say that. I mean, Jordan, we had an extensive show sheet for tonight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. No show sheet for tonight.
Yeah, no show sheet survives my podcast appearances, unfortunately.
So I'm gonna put this up there though too, just kind of along the lines of why people tagged you. So I wanted to hear your answer. I asked you first why you were tagged, but Tommy Blair was one of the folks who tagged you saying Jordan McNamara all day. So I asked him why, so I could share this. So if it's Jordan, I think he's probably the most willing to live on an island from the temperamental and often inaccurate dynasty trade market, using data as the backbone and as a sword that he wields primarily to destroy you at quarterback and tight end. I've read all of his AOD books and used his base rates and work with AWARP to refine how I play Dynasty. He was the one who convinced me to go any RB on a 53 before it was cool and led me to the repeatability of AWARP advantages and chasing elite profiles. If there's any subscription your listeners should pay for, aside from ours, of course, it's at AOD. So that's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's got to feel cool to read and see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's it's funny because all of my work has basically come from trying to answer why I failed. Right. And, AWARP was one of those things, right? The rookie base rates. I mean, I literally became a quote dynasty analyst and ultimately wrote my first book about dynasty fantasy football because at 206 in a rookie draft, I took Kiaris Garrett. And if you're wondering who Kiaris Garrett is, he is a rookie that was highly sort of touted that ended up going undrafted that never recorded any stats in the NFL. Okay. He's a wide receiver out of, I think, Tulsa, if memory serves. But that's neither here nor there. He was an undrafted rookie that I took in the 2nd round of rookie draft at wide receiver, which is a horrendous bet. And I learned a lot from that experience, which was like, okay, well, what should a 2nd round pick mean to us, right? What types of profiles should we start looking at there? And that's really the research that sort of came out of that experience was I can't keep doing this. I can't keep making those mistakes. How did I make that mistake? How did I fail? And so all of my AOD research is basically kind of stemmed from that. And so, the AWARP thing, right? It's been cool to see people kind of pick up on that.
Yeah, it is starting to heat up a bit for sure.
And it's funny because like people ask me like, do you think your advantage will go away? I'm like, we'll keep changing stuff, right? We'll keep sort of seeking out edges. But I don't think like you still look around your dynasty leagues and I still don't see a lot of rosters that look like mine, right? And so
yeah, there you go.
A couple more might, but that doesn't mean my edge has gone away. It just means that my edge has been reduced a little bit, right? I do think like if anything has sort of come from it, it's people value backup running backs more than they did before I started talking. I don't think that's all me. I think other people have sort of either picked up on that, found it on their own. People that I've worked with have pitched that. I know Chad's big on that. Chad Parsons.
Yep.
We hosted a Football Guys show for 3 years, I think, and then now we do Dynasty Think Tank together. We've been hosting podcasts together for I think 7 years, right? So like we've kind of very much think along similar lines, and I think our research has either tracked each other's, or kind of led each other in a similar fashion. I know Scott talks about that, right? Other people are kind of on this idea. So I don't think I'm alone on an island. But I do think, like, I think being contrarian is, in a game where it's 1 out of 12 win, if you're contrarian and you're right, that has a huge, huge implication, right? Because if you're contrarian and right in a game where 1 in 12 people win, right? There's a huge, and where it's like 6 or 7x the payout when you're right.
Yeah, right.
Like the consequences of that are enormous. And so that's actually, one of the things that people will talk about, like the stock market approach or like the portfolio approach. I actually sort of totally reject that idea, because I don't think my goal isn't to be sort of at the market average, right? My goal is to be a top. Really going into the season, my goal is to be a top 2 team, because I want to earn a buy. Right. I don't think you can do that by going and saying, all right, I want to play at the market rates. Right. So I think that requires you to do some things differently. Right. I think it requires you to reject what a lot of people enjoy, which is, I'll probably be forever known, right? When my fantasy obituary is written, I'll be known as the anti George Pickens guy. Right. and the anti George Pickens guy is, I think George Pickens is a great example of all of that I've learned, because 5 years ago, Jordan would have been all over George Pickens. Oh, look at this encouraging rookie profile, all this stuff. Yep. But as I've learned more, and as I've studied more, and as I've incorporated more of this research in my books and in my analysis, it's taken me from like, oh, look, shiny, flashy guy. Right? And then to say, okay, well, look, the yardage total is really good. And then it's taken me to a more like a 300 level aspect of saying, well, is what does that production actually mean, right? And what was that production based on, right? And what it was based on was huge volume, right? And not in a way that's like efficient. It's just playing a lot of snaps, which is a good thing. You want to play a lot of snaps, but it wasn't efficient. And a lot of his production and the stuff that people really enjoyed about him was his contested catches and all that stuff.
Sure.
Which is, my research indicated, was entirely random year over year. Right? Like, that's not a stat after 1 year.
It's nothing predictable. Yeah.
Right. You can't say after 1 year that George Pickens is predictably good at that. You can say that he performed really well at it last year, but that has no relationship to what it's going to be this year. And by the way, he's terrible at it this year. Right. So again, you start looking at that, and I've found some other metrics and stuff along that lines, but all of that is to say, like, I have sort of come to appreciate that profile, right? Sort of that up and coming wide receiver who, quote, could be a star, is a trap. And as a class, I avoid that. With some rare exceptions, I avoid that class. And what I do is basically just say, fine, screw it. I'll take Mike Evans. Right. I'll take Keenan Allen cheaper.
There you go.
And, the thing that people will sort of come back to and say, like, well, you can't live like that forever. Yeah, you can. Because what ends up happening is you make trades from your depth at running back to get wide receivers. Like, I did that to get Christian Watson this year. I did that to get, I actually did. Chad and I did one. I think Scott might even be in the league. Chad and I did it for Quentin Johnson, who I don't even a huge fan of, but we got him for like a 3rd round pick. Like, you do stuff like that where what you end up doing is you buy those profiles, you buy those you buy those young receivers, but you buy them at cheap. You don't pay a high price, right? And I think that's kind of the thing. Or you buy the elite guys, right? Like, you buy the Amon-Ra St. Brown profile on the way up, right? You buy the Puka Nacua profile on the way up. You buy the it didn't work out, but you buy the Christian Watson profile, right? Where you say, hey, if this turns out right, like, if he can stay healthy, that outlook could be AJ Brown, right? Like, that's the types of bets you make, as opposed to making one on a guy like George Pickens, has kind of always been my thought. So that has taken me to a place where I'm willing to stand on an island, because I don't think the George Pickens profile pays off. Right? I think people are trapped by that, but they like it because it feels good, and I don't care how it feels. I just want to win.
Yeah, we've talked about that on Trades in 5 too. How, in terms of how we're gonna play rookie drafts next year. I mean, obviously there's a lot of fluidity. So much comes into play, league economy, value of picks. But in terms of like the picking of players, a lot of it will just be making sure you're picking an asset that's liquid, that's
Mhm.
valuable, that has some kind of appeal to the market as well. So obviously you're very heavy into the analytics, but talk to me about how league economy and psychology works into how you play. Or are you just trusting the numbers? What does that pie look like, Jordan, in terms of how much data you look at and then how much you're playing the people?
So I think that in Dynasty, I think it's really hard to predict future valuations because I a lot of times think that the Dynasty marketplace will do things that make no sense, right? Will evaluate, or not that they don't make any sense, but that the basis for that is wrong, right? So for example, I thought George Pickens was overvalued. And for I could point out a million reasons why I thought that that was true, and it wouldn't move the market. Um, I tried to point out a million reasons why the market was wrong on Justin Fields, and it didn't really move the market. And so I think you have to be careful about trying to say, I need to follow along because everyone else thinks this is valuable. And I think you got to be really careful playing that game, right? So, what's much more predictable is player production profiles, right?
Hmm.
To say, Mike Evans might go down in price, but I have a pretty good, like, if I had to bet on him to get 1,000 yards, like that's a pretty good bet historically,
Yes.
right?
Exactly.
It's 100%.
It's 100% correct.
I might actually get in trouble because I wrote at Football Guys this week. Matt Waldman does our roundtables, and
Mhm.
I'm a staff writer over there. And he asked, like,
Nice.
which veteran do you basically, are you convinced of that'll be a starter next year? And it was like Mike Evans and a whole bunch of other people. And my answer was Mike Evans, and I said he's 1,000-yard receiver every year, and I will not stop believing that until he doesn't do it.
Yeah.
And it was like period. And it was like a 45-word answer, which is well below the minimum threshold. That's exactly what I believe, right? So I didn't need to write
Yeah.
any more. Like that's exactly the process that I'm going to go through, because any situation that you've ever bet against Mike Evans, you've been wrong, right? And so
Absolutely.
so that's kind of the thought there. But yeah, so again, I think that there's undervalued aspects of Dynasty, which, I'll give you a good example. At the same price, a wide receiver who has hit before, right, who has a top 24 seasonal finish in total points, is substantially more likely to hit again
Yeah.
than a wide receiver who has not hit for a top 24 seasonal finish. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and, if you have two fifth round wide receivers, right, that let's say they're, I don't know, 19 and 20 in ADP, right? They're right next to each other. The guy that's hit substantially better odds to hit again, right? Because what is baked into that other guy is a ton of age premium. Like that's how he's that valuable. And so I have just basically come to say, I'm going to reject that age premium. Right. And so that leaves me on an island. And so it leaves me a lot of times without a lot of great trades to make in the off season, because I don't
Yeah.
have that sort of flashy guys.
Yeah, the sexy Daves. You can't move like Mike Evans. Even Tyreek in the offseason isn't the time to move him. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times my Julys will be kind of boring, right? Like, because I won't be in a ton of trade negotiations, but my team will be, well, my Decembers are very exciting because I'm playing for championships, right? That's kind of the trade.
Love it.
The other thing that I've
Flex.
kind of learned to do is like, I don't pick favorites in rookie drafts. Like I've learned that lesson hard. I don't try to pick the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, right? If there's going to be 5 first round wide receivers this year, I want to be in on the 4th and 5th one off the board. I don't want to be in on 1, 2, or 3, because ADP historically hasn't been predictive of success. Neither is where they've gone in the NFL draft. And so my position to sort of, how do you sort of get younger at wide receiver while playing the old guys? Well, it's to just trade down and just take one, right? I don't pick wide receivers. I take them. And that's kind of the couple of edges that I've sort of run up and had some success with.
This is crazy, man. When you're talking, I'm like totally focusing, but at the same time, you make me think of my teams so much. When I'm like going through like matchups, like, oh man, what Jordan's saying, like, should I do this or that? Because where I'm at right now, and this is not necessarily on topic, but this is championship week. I'm looking at my squads, and I'm in 4 championships. I'm pretty stoked about it. 2 of them are the Dynasty Trades in 5 listener leagues, so that's fun. But I'm going through, and it's like, do I want to buy like an old hammer? Like, do I want to spend big? Do I want to give Shane? Are you in this audience? Shane, if you're in here, send me a Tyreek Hill offer in the Squirt League. But do I want to spend on Tyreek, who's got a bad matchup? Do I want to spend less on Mike Evans? Amari Cooper is another option, has a bad matchup. Talk to me about how you play. And yes, this is a start sit question, Jordan McNamara. How do you play like bad matchups mixed with the dynasty value of these old guys, if that makes any sense? Like buying a Mike Evans at cost or buying a Tyreek Hill?
I mean, in one game sample sizes, you got to be careful about it, right? Like you got to be super careful about like, what's the odds that Mike Evans outproduces Tyreek Hill this week? Like, it's a decent chance.
It
right?
is so, at Baltimore for Tyreek.
Yeah, and Mike Evans is getting New Orleans without Marshawn Lattimore, right? Yep. So, like, you know, so you got to be careful. Like, I think the way to kind of look at that is you make a dynasty trade, right? If you say, okay, this is going to juice up my lineup, but I come back to, I don't know, right? I kind of answer a lot of these questions with, I don't know. And if the answer is, I don't know, well, okay, well, how confident should I be, right? That's again, like, this is kind of a great example of what I'm talking about a lot of times. And you should say, okay, well, you know, which one's the right price from a dynasty? You know, if the season ends tomorrow, right, how am I going to feel about the valuation that I paid, right? Independent of whether I won this year. And then you kind of view it that way. And then you, I think, backtrack and say, okay, the season's going to end a day before that price. You know, how do I feel about that?
Yep.
And kind of sort of judge it from there. But if I was going to make a dynasty trade right now, and I'm a contender, I'm still in it, I would view it. I think the way that I would view it is I would think about like, okay, the season ends on Sunday. I don't think there's a Monday night game this week, right? I think it ends on Sunday. The season ends on Sunday. How would I feel about this Monday morning? Right. And if the answer is I feel good about it, then I probably should make the trade. And if the answer is, well, it depends on how I did on Sunday, you got to be careful about that, right? Because, you know, if things don't go your way, then you've just done something stupid, right? Like, you know, so that's the thing that you got to be really, really careful about.
No, for sure. And there's one trade in particular that I'm thinking about, and then I'm going to ask you. We'll pivot back to something else, but it's a 12 team. Look at me being selfish. It's like, oh, I got Jordan McNamara on. I'm going to ask him about a trade here. No, but 12 teams start 9, so it's shallow, half PPR. It's full PPR for tight ends. I lost Chase, and is it still looking like he's out this week?
Also, I saw he walked.
Most signs are pointing to he walked through today.
I think I can check. Go ahead.
So
I saw him participate, but I haven't checked the wire yet.
So the trade that I sent the other day, it was before this past week. I sent Chase for Amon-Ra and what's projected to be an early 24 second. Now, if Chase is out again, you mentioned making a dynasty trade.
Today. He DNP'd today.
Did not practice. Okay, so practice. What do you think about that? I see Genji, I maybe butchered that name in the chat. No thanks. What do you think, man? Jamar Chase or Amon-Ra in an early second?
Can you make it a 2 for 2?
I want to make a ship.
Can you make it a 2 for 2? Can you make it a bigger deal? Whenever there's a situation like that, I say, I don't reject it out of hand. I say, can I make it a 2 for 2 deal where I feel, you know, a 2-player for 2-player deal, and you might still have to give a pick or whatever, but can I do something? Can I use this trade as a vehicle to do something else, whether it's roster construction, whether it's, you know, whether it's some sort of ancillary objective, to sort of use that as the vehicle to do it. Right. And so, you know, whether that is,
so it's like a QB pivot up maybe as yes, like part of it. Right. Yeah. So big building in something like that. No, right. I love it. I love it.
And I haven't done much trading. My leagues don't stay open typically this late, so I haven't really been in that mindset. But I'm thinking, like, you know, is there a quarterback move? Right, like, for example, let's just use an example. If I have Justin Herbert and I have Jamar Chase, right?
Mhm.
Can I go to Lamar Jackson, right? Does that person still that's not contending this year still view Herbert more valuable than Lamar Jackson? I don't know the answer to that question, but that would be something I would explore, right? And so it's just the counter that I would send back would be, hey, let's sort of flip that. And then what you're doing with that is saying, okay, now I'm getting a leverage at quarterback this week, and I view the guys similarly long term, right? I kind of think about it like that. Which would be kind of what I would think in that sort of space. Is there some other move that you can make, right? Is there something at tight end that you want to do? It's something like that. I would sort of try and add to that. I am a huge fan of Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Oh, me too, man. I've got luckily so much Amon-Ra.
Yeah. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I am going to probably err to the side of like having him pretty close to Jamar Chase in terms of fantasy valuation, in terms of dynasty valuation. So, and I think that like he could, I am not in any way a self-interested party with props for him to lead the league in reception.
Nothing like, there's nothing. There's no money on the line.
Him or CeeDee Lamb to lead the league in receptions. And I'm super excited about watching Saturday night. Those things are not influenced by that at all. But yeah, I mean, I view him like right there after, I view Jefferson as one, I view Chase in a tier below that. And then I view the guys after that in a tier. And I think you can put them in a lot of different ways, right? I think you could put, you could sort of re-rack that, I don't know, like 3 through
like
8 at wide receiver, whatever that tier is.
Yeah.
You could throw it in like one of those Yahtzee tumblers and throw it out on the table, and it could come out in any order, and be like, I can't really argue with that, and like you could do it again, and I'd be like, I can't really argue with that either. Like,
or you nail the large straight though. You do one shake and nail the large straight. Do you actually know Yahtzee? Do you know that's a successful move when you shake out the dice? Okay, never mind. I was hoping you were going to be
played Yahtzee, but it's been a while, so
it would have been hilarious if you were a Yahtzee guy, and that's like a common comparison you make. But no, you roll like the 6 dice, and then you're like, boom, look at this! I got my large straight where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yes. I think some large trade, and I was like, I'm not familiar with that, but I do know the large trade, the large straight. Yes,
yeah. But so I gotta pull this up here. Where is it? I missed it. Okay, let me ask you this question, man. So we haven't had anybody on who's written a book or books in your case. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about how that even happened. Just like you as a person, you're getting into the space and you're like, oh, I'm gonna write a book.
So the way the book happened was it would have been the season of 2017. I got into DFS, and I had done Dynasty. I was covering Dynasty stuff. I was working with Chad at UTH. Mm-hmm. I was recording podcasts. I was doing a little writing, but nothing major. And I decided to sort of get into DFS. And so I started playing like 3 or 4 weeks of DFS. And I realized that I didn't know what I was doing, right? I had a little bit of success week 1, and then I kind of came back like the next couple of weeks, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And it was, I realized that I was out of my league.
Okay.
And I said, I got to put a pin in this and come back to it. I'm just not smart enough was basically the thing I came back to. And so I said, I'll pick it up in the off season. Right. Cause I wanted to look at patterns. I wanted to spend, I realized I needed a whole off season to like study.
Yeah. You need to take it seriously if you were going to keep doing
it. And I am no, people ask why I don't do IDP. People ask why I don't play Devi, because I would go down these rabbit holes if I did that. And so what I ended up doing was I spent like January, February, and March of that off season just diving into data. And I went back like 10 years. I did individual game logs. I aggregated just an incredible amount of data in terms of like going through all the stuff, all the start rate stuff. I just kept going and digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And I kept coming out with Dynasty takeaways. Right. And I didn't intend to do that. I just kept coming out with Dynasty takeaways. So I just kind of like write them down. And what ended up turning out as a DFS research project became a very big outline for a very too big of a book.
That's so kick-ass, man.
And so, and at that point, I was doing a lot of research, and I had a newborn at home, and my wife's super supportive. And she said, what are you doing all this research for? And I said, well, and again, I have not at this point, I have the outline, and it's like February, right? Like the fantasy football season's over. And I'm like, well, I'm going to write a book. And so I ended up writing a book on it. And that was actually, I take that back. Yeah. So that would have been the 2018 off season. That would have been 2018 that I spent writing it. I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then I released it in January of 2019, the first one. And I didn't expect it to get much play, right? The reason that I wrote it was so that we could justify to my wife why I was spending so much time doing fantasy football research. And at least I could say, if I have a book, then at least it is a reason to continue doing it.
I get it.
And it sold surprisingly well to me.
It did pretty well right out the gates.
Yeah. And it was like, and it's funny because to sell it, I agreed to do strategy sessions with everyone that bought it. And let me tell you, it performed way better than I thought it would perform. And by the time like I got through the strategy sessions, I was like, no mas. Like I didn't.
Yeah. You had to cut that off.
And so I was like, all right, I'm done. I can't, and then you got to try and track everyone down and schedule it, and people cancel. Like it was a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
And so I was done. Right. I wrote the book. I was done. And then I started promoting it, and people would have questions about the book, and the questions about the book would mirror a lot of the questions that I got in the strategy sessions. And I said, well, I didn't intend to write a second edition. I didn't intend this to be like a franchise thing. I intended it to be a standalone evergreen book. And I started following up on the research questions that people asked, and that would be for podcast appearances. And I was hustling to I must have made 50 or 60 podcast appearances. I did every show that would have me.
That's awesome, man.
And so I, in the process of that, had a whole bunch of questions that were unanswered, and I had all this data. So I went back and I redid it. Right. And I came back with a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's actually the edition that came out with AWARP, was a 2020 edition. And, which to this day is probably the most important thing I've ever written.
2020. It was that long ago. The
that long ago. And so that was the edition that really changed it for me. And that was actually before I had Superflex data. And then it took a couple more years to get any reliable Superflex data. And now I've taken a pretty aggressive turn towards Superflex in terms of a lot of my coverage. But that's really how it all started. And I made a ton of mistakes along the way because I didn't plan on making a franchise, right? I didn't plan on making a business. I just planned on writing a book to assuage my
you probably know yourself better though, because you were saying like you would get into a rabbit hole if you started with like Debian IDP. So surely you knew what you were getting yourself into by writing one book.
I didn't. Well, I knew.
Although it's such an undertaking.
Long. Like it was right. And I don't know if you've ever written anything like of substance, but to go through and edit that thing is like is incredibly arduous, at least for me, because I read what and I have a whole process. I've got a couple of editors. I sit down with one. We actually sit in a room and read the entire thing from front to back. And it's a completely humbling experience, because I think when I read it out loud and it sounds horrible, it's typically the first run through of it. And thank God for my editor, Jeff, who's like brilliant and patient and all those things. And Adam, they get me through that stuff. But yeah, it was a really, really hard thing to do. And that like, there's nothing that I dislike more than like the couple of weeks that I have to edit that book, because I just hate doing it.
It's not sexy. It's like, oh, you're editing your book. You're like, yeah, but it's like me with editing videos. It's like, yeah, but this is the brutal time. You think it's fun.
Yeah. And I don't know if like you've ever read a transcript of you talking. Like I've actually had to read a transcript of me talking for work, and it's like I'm like nauseous after reading it.
It is absolutely
and that's really how the editing process to my books go. And so I don't like that aspect of it, but I like everything else of it. Right? That's the hardest part. And so, yeah, so that's basically how it kind of became. So I didn't plan on it being a franchise. And so I made a lot of mistakes in terms of like how to plan the business in advance, because I didn't intend it to be like a money-making venture. And so the second time around, so then I wrote the 2020 edition, released it in January of 2020 or February, right? Whatever, like the first, it's usually the week between, it's usually Senior Bowl week. So it's usually the week between the off week, right? The week that's off from the AFC, from the championship week and the Super Bowl. It's usually that week that I release it. And so I did a whole, I do the promotional stuff, right? And actually, it was funny because that year I was unemployed at that point because I was changing jobs. And so I had like a 2-week window, and I was like, I will book any appearance that I could make. So I was just every podcast, anything, I must have done 25 in 2 weeks. And then I got my new job, and COVID happened. And I had started to toy around with creating a Patreon at that point. And so I created Patreon in the couple of weeks that I was off. And, I was just going to start recording some stuff. And I was a couple of podcasts a week. And again, I had a little bit of a subscriber base because of the books. I had emails and, and people wanted more of the content, which I found out after I wrote the first one. And so I kind of capitalized on that with the second one. And then COVID happened. And I'm a lawyer by trade, and I was working in a law firm, which I found very quickly that that's not what I wanted to do. When I moved jobs in February of 2020, like it took me about a couple of months to figure out that's what I didn't want to do. But mid-March, I got, everyone got sent home. And so I was sitting at this desk I'm sitting at right now, and exactly where it's positioned. And, super lonely, right? All the effects of COVID, right? Lonely, anxiety, depression, all that stuff, and, hair looking terrible, unshaved, all that stuff. Right. And I got a 2-year-old, so all that stuff is just, stressed out, am I going to lose my job? I've only been here 6 weeks, all that stuff. So I just said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to just every night at like 9 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and record a podcast, and I'll just release it the next day. And so I did that for like
hammering out content.
Straight days. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I did it 94 straight days or something like that. And I think I finally took a break in like whatever like 100 days from like mid-March would have been. And so I did a couple, I did a few more, and then I was like, I really like the pace of that. And so I just went back to hammering the rest of the off season. I did every day. And you come up with different ideas to talk about and all that stuff. And I just went sort of that route. And then the season came, and I was doing in-season stuff. And then I transitioned from Patreon to doing my own, through my own website.
Yeah.
And now you have your own individual podcast feed, right? Now you have an actual feed you can put into Apple Podcasts or whatever, instead of it being a Patreon feed. And I can do stuff through the website. I got a couple of tools and stuff on there as well. So you get all that. But again, so each year I release 350 plus podcasts, right? And that's just kind of the thing that, I wanted to be the person that I couldn't get enough content. So I was like, I'm just going to kind of cater to me and just record kind of like every day.
That's
awesome. But you kind of learn to not record every day. You record 2 days a week and just
you batch.
Yeah. So that's kind of the deal. That's kind of how it all happened, right? And so that's basically how I got where I am.
That's wild, man. The 90 some odd days straight.
Yeah. Thank God for COVID, because I would have never taken that plunch. And it worked, right? Because people needed the entertainment.
It totally works. Yeah.
People needed the entertainment, and wanted the relationship, right? Because like we had a group chat, but when you listen to a podcast, right, and when you listen every day, you get a certain, I release a podcast that, in the off season, it releases at 8 o'clock every morning. So people are listening to that on the way to work or whatever. That's as a listener to podcasts, that's a relationship I'm kind of building with them, even though I'm not talking, right? Like when I'm a listener, I'm listening to that. And I think that during the pandemic, I think that really hit with a lot of people, right? Because you needed that, there's a certain, loneliness aspect to it that people wanted to just kind of feel part of something. And I think I was just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.